Hello, welcome to True Crime Talk. This is Kathleen, and in this video, I'm just going to be talking about some various crimes that I've recently researched and looked up to see what was going on with them. If you remember about, I think it was 6 months ago, there was an acid attack in Savannah, Georgia, and this woman had acid thrown on her, mostly, I guess, her head, maybe upper shoulders, and her arms. But it was acid was thrown on this woman at a Savannah, Georgia park. And so I haven't heard anything about it recently, so I went to look it up to see what's going on with the case, and I found some news stories from today or one day ago from WJCL News, and it says the victim and mayor spat. So apparently, obviously, this crime hasn't been solved yet, and the victim doesn't feel like the mayor of Savannah is taking her crime seriously enough.
Forsyth Park acid attack is criticizing Savannah Mayor Van Johnson's recent comments about the case. And she's also raising concerns about what Savannah police have not released to you, the public. Ashley Wazlewski and her family say key information about a description of an alleged suspect needs to be shared. I have the latest on the growing backlash and an all-new WJCL 22 News investigates.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us.
Savannah Mayor Van Johnson's weekly news conference offers information about pressing issues.
I'm the mayor of tourism. I have cards in my office saying I'm the mayor of tourism.
And top news stories of the day.
So anticipating your interest this afternoon, I'm going to lead with the acid attack investigation.
This topic generating criticism from acid attack victim Ashley Wazlewski after some of the mayor's comments about the unsolved crime.
Do we know this is still a random act?
I'm going to leave that to the police to be able to answer. I mean, again, we have not, and I've been in this community for a while. I've served as a law enforcement officer in this community for a while. I'm not familiar with anyone ever being attacked by acid. I'm just not. And every officer I've spoken to, nobody can really remember that. In my mind, doing that is really a really personal thing. But again, I'll leave that to the officers to be able to determine. Again, I don't know relative to that.
Watching that mayor.
So the way the mayor sounds, and I live in Georgia, but I don't live in Savannah, so I know nothing about the mayor or what's going on down there in Savannah politically or racially. But I know a lot of online comments have accused the mayor of being like biased against finding this criminal because the victim is white and the perpetrator is apparently, according to the victim, a black male. But I find that hard to believe that in Savannah, Georgia, a city that depends so much on tourism, and they get, tourists from around the world, that the mayor of the city would not take a crime like this seriously. A crime of a woman walking alone in a park who gets acid thrown in her face, because acid, well, it can kill you, it can blind you, and it can also, physically disfigure you for life. So that would definitely maybe dissuade some tourists from coming to the area if they felt like there are people in Savannah throwing acid at people randomly, and that the government, the mayor, and the police did not take the crime seriously. But, I don't live in Savannah, so I cannot say for sure what's going on. I know nothing about the mayor of Savannah or the politics going on in Savannah or the police department of Savannah. So I can't say, one way or the other what actually is going on down there, and if there could be some like bias or, kind of like with the Nancy Guthrie case, people don't like the sheriff in Pima County, Arizona, investigating that case. Could the police in Savannah and the mayor just not be doing their jobs correctly? That's possible, of course. Politicians are politicians and police work for politicians, so anything's possible. But I find it hard to believe that if the mayor of Savannah and the police of Savannah were not taking this crime seriously, that this woman would not, like the state government of Georgia, Governor Kemp or the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, would not get involved if they could at all, or the FBI, because this was an acid attack. And I don't, I know it's not a federal crime, I guess, but it's a serious crime, and maybe the FBI have been involved in this case or would be involved in this case if they were asked to. It's such a serious crime. I think that if there was really somebody going around throwing acid on random people in Savannah, I think that they would take it seriously. So let's see what else this says.
Mayor's news conference online was Ashley Waslewski. The very next day, through a family member, Waslewski sent this statement to WJCL 22 News. It reads, "From our family's perspective, we want to be very clear. There is no known personal connection between Ashley and her attacker. The mayor suggesting on multiple occasions that this attack feels personal without any evidence not only risks shifting focus away from identifying the attacker, but directly undermines the need for credible leads. We find his comments irresponsible. Ashley, her family, and her friends are personally offended and angered. Ashley provided a description of the attacker, as did the witness who released his description of the attacker to local news stations. Yet SPD and city officials have not shared this information with the public. That witness, named Kay Kendall, spoke to WJCL 22 News investigator Tia Maggio in January, saying that he noticed a man acting agitated and arguing, perhaps on his cell phone, on the same footpath as Waslewski. Kendall said it looked like he had calmed down, then he heard screams later.
He's about 6 foot. Looked like he had dreads. He wasn't all black.
Kendall says the 6-foot-tall man appeared to calm down. Then came the screams.
That's where I heard her screaming, "Help me, help me."
Ashley writes, "We are asking clearly and respectfully that any information that could help the public identify this individual be shared. There is a combined reward of over $100,000. The video referenced in recent days is from a heat sensor camera near the park. Therefore, it provides no visual identifiable characteristic of the attacker." At that news conference, the mayor concurred with law enforcement not to release the video because of its so-called poor quality.
It promotes speculation, and it provides an influx of unreliable tips. So releasing this video can divert investigative resources. It can hamper progress and ultimately interfere with building a case that can be prosecuted.
WJCL 22 News asked Mayor Johnson for an interview about Waslewski's criticism. The mayor's office sent us this statement that reads in part, "I categorically reject any attempts by WJCL or any other news media outlet to mischaracterize my words, sensationalize, or capitalize off of the pain of the victim and the victim's family. Our top and only priority is finding justice for Ms. Waslewski, and that is where our focus shall remain."
We would really like to get this individual in custody. And I think that we have that still top of mind.
This investigation into one of the city's most horrific crimes and a mystery at this point enters its 6th month this week. Have a question you'd like us to investigate? Email.
So that was that news report from one day ago from WJCL News. So what to think about that? When I first heard the mayor's comments, when I first watched this video, it sounded to me, and yes, this may be a wild theory, but remember, this is just my opinion. I'm not a judge, a jury. It's just my opinion. We're just talking about crime here on this channel. It's just, in my opinion, that maybe the mayor or the police or whoever's involved in investigating this case think that perhaps maybe this was some sort of a faked crime, like she did this to herself, or somebody she personally knew did this to her, and she's not given up the person who did it to her, or she asked somebody to do this to her for whatever weird reason. And I know that sounds crazy, and you say, well, why would somebody throw acid on themselves? Because one, it's painful, and two, it can disfigure you for life. Well, people have done all kinds of things to themselves for whatever reason. Could this be like a Sherry Papini type deal? It, at first when I saw the mayor speaking when I first watched this video, it made me think that he knows more than what he's saying about the investigation. And so maybe he knows that they found evidence that there was nobody else in the park at the time that this happened to her with her, or they found evidence that she might be the type of person who would concoct a story like this for attention or some stuff like that. They won't release a video because he said, like it might get tips that won't help the investigation because it, could lead to useless tips or whatever. And it makes me wonder if the description that she gave and the witness gave are of a man who they've already identified and ruled out as a suspect because they think that he didn't do anything to her. They think she just gave a description of somebody who was there in the park who she saw, but somehow she did this to herself or something. A few months back, like about maybe 4 months ago, around not too long after this happened, they did release a picture of a black male wearing I believe it was Bugs Bunny t-shirt. And the police did interview him, but nothing ever came of that. An arrest never came of that. So he was just somebody obviously walking through the park. And apparently she did not identify that person as her attacker. She gave a description of somebody else. Unless the man in the Bugs Bunny shirt was the person whom she described, and the police figured out he had nothing at all to do with this, or they just didn't have the evidence at the time and they're still working on the case. It's just this all is just speculation on my part. But I wanted to look up this crime to see if anybody had been arrested for it, and I see these news reports about and people commenting on the videos that the mayor just doesn't care because the victim was white and he's black and all that. And I'm thinking, I don't think so. This isn't, this is the state of Georgia. This is not New York City or Los Angeles. This isn't California. This is the state of Georgia. And even though, yes, we have a lot of bad politicians here too, and like we have bad judges, bad district attorneys, bad mayors, and stuff like that, we have people down here who don't take crime seriously like they should, and people who are soft on criminal, soft on crime, and all that. We are no way near as bad as like a city like New York City, who they just keep releasing violent criminals over and over and over again to hurt more and more people. And Georgia is not a state that ignores crimes of this magnitude. Throwing acid on somebody is life-threatening and disfiguring for life. People, everything in this country is always, or now anyway, hyper political or hyper racial. And so people want to turn, and I think the victim, if I remember correctly, is a Jewish woman. So she's a Jewish white woman, and I guess she gave a description of a black male. And so everybody wants to turn this into like, oh, because she's white, the police don't care in Savannah, the mayor doesn't care, or because the perp is black, they don't want to show him because they're being favorable to black criminals. They don't, but I think even as political and weird as things are in this country at times and in different areas, I still think, or maybe I'm just wishful thinking because it's my state of Georgia, that the city of Savannah, Georgia, a beautiful, beautiful tourist city on the coast of Georgia, that if they had any evidence of anybody going around throwing acid on one person or multiple people, no matter what race the victim was and no matter what race the perp was, they would arrest that person if they had evidence. So since it's been 6 months, I don't think there hasn't been an arrest because they haven't investigated the heck out of this case. I think there hasn't been an arrest because they just don't have any evidence to prove who put acid on this woman, or they think the woman is lying. And I know that's a crazy thought to most sane people because you think, well, how could a woman put acid on herself? That would be so painful. It's like setting yourself on fire. Well, we know people do stuff like that. People do set themselves on fire. People do purposely drink chemicals. People, harm themselves all kinds of ways. And of course, we know people end their own lives, but we also know people who just injure themselves and cause themselves a great deal of pain for whatever reasons. And so I mentioned Sherry Papini case. That was the case where that woman in California faked her own kidnapping. But not only did she, like pretend like she was kidnapped and all that, she also physically harmed herself. Like, I mean, she physically injured her body, cut her hair, and like injured herself, and had like the man she was staying with, who I believe was her ex-boyfriend, uh, she had him do stuff to her body to make it look like she had been injured by somebody. And that was all done by herself, or she was convicted of it. I mean, there are some crazy people out there who think that she's totally innocent, that she was telling the truth, or that her boyfriend actually kidnapped her and that she is an innocent victim. That's, you know, when it comes to crimes today, you have to look at every avenue, every aspect. And you certainly don't, somebody who's had acid thrown on them, you don't want to just go up to them and say, we know you did this to yourself, or we think you did this to yourself, and we're not looking for anybody. Because, no, I think the police, and I don't know if the GBI and the FBI have been involved too, but I know that this crime has been investigated. I don't think this is a crime that the city of Savannah would just ignore, or the state of Georgia would just ignore, and for any reason, no matter what the race of the victim or the perp are. So that makes me think, but maybe I'm just, being too optimistic about the government of Savannah. But I'm not as negative as a lot of the commenters on the videos regarding this case, that they think that the mayor just doesn't care, or that he's racist because the victim is white, or he wants to protect black people from being arrested. I think any sane person who is the mayor of a city, especially Savannah, Georgia, a tourist city, would want anybody, no matter what race, religion, age, national origin, whatever, would want them to be arrested for such a heinous crime, unless like it was his brother or something, his child. So, in other words, I don't believe that the mayor of Savannah is not allowing this crime to be investigated thoroughly. And mayors do have a lot of power over their police forces. At least in small towns, they do. I would assume Savannah would be the same way. It's not a small town, but I assume big cities are the same, that mayors have a lot of power over the police and their investigations and stuff. So, is it possible that this woman did some type of fake crime deal? Well, it's not fake. I mean, she really got burned with acid. Did she harm herself for attention, for mental illness, for some weird reason, or for money? I don't know if she got money like from a GoFundMe or whatever. I don't know a whole lot about this case, but I know I looked it up today and I come across these stories that, well, one, it hasn't been solved yet, and two, people in the comments think it hasn't been solved because the mayor doesn't care. And just listening to the mayor speak, his words, it just made me think, he's like saying something without saying something. does he know more than he's saying? Does he know that the police have found no evidence of there being somebody else in the park with that woman who could have thrown acid on her, and that she's lying? Or do they actually have evidence that she might have done it to herself there in the park? Or did she like come to the park, she had already thrown acid on herself, like somewhere, some other location, or in a restroom at the park, and then she just gave a description of somebody she saw at the park to make the crime look more real? Is she some type of a wacko, in other words? Because, I mean, you would think that somebody who would do something like that would be a wacko, but they live among us. There are people who do these kinds of things. So, of course, you want to assume a victim is a victim. But since it's been 6 months and this crime hasn't been solved, could there be a reason why it hasn't been solved? And the mayor kept talking about, like, we don't have crimes like this in Savannah. What That doesn't mean that they couldn't have a crime like that, or that some random person, like in big cities where they have lots of homeless people who are mentally ill or on drugs, they do crazy stuff. They randomly attack people with hammers, axes, or whatever. So could somebody, just a mentally ill person on the street, have attacked this woman for no reason? But the mayor kept saying something like, we've never had something like this happen in Savannah. It just doesn't happen here. And that he used to be police officer, and that he thinks it was more likely something personal or something. What does he know? Obviously, he's the mayor, and so the police force, he would know what was going on in the police force. And plus, he used to be a police officer, from what I gathered from what he said. So does he know more about this investigation? And does he know that this investigation is leaning toward, like, it was some sort of domestic dispute type deal, and the woman's not giving the truth for whatever reason? She wants to protect somebody or protect herself, or she having an affair of some sort, and she doesn't want a husband or boyfriend, I think she's married, but I'm not sure, to know that she was at the park with somebody else who threw acid on her. I'm just speculating, talking about different theories that could be. But anyway, so I looked up this crime today, and all I got from it was that it hasn't been solved, and the mayor's not giving out a whole lot of information about what's going on in the investigation. But the way he talks makes me think that he's like thinks, or is leaning toward, that there wasn't like a stranger involved in this crime, that it was somebody the woman knew. So maybe there's something weird going in this case, and she wasn't randomly attacked by a stranger. Maybe it was more of a domestic issue, or even weirder, she did something to herself. I know that, some people find it so hard to believe, but if you're into true crime and you read true crime books and stuff, you'll know that this is nothing new, that this happens, that for whatever reason, people harm themselves physically, even life altering physical changes like acid, for whatever reasons that I don't understand, for attention, for money, for sympathy, something going on in their families, and they're lying about whatever. So hopefully this case is not that. But I don't have a description of a suspect, like a picture of a suspect to show y'all, a drawing of a suspect, because they haven't released one to my knowledge. All I remember is a few months ago, they showed a picture from the park of a black male in a Bugs Bunny shirt, and they did find him and talk to him, and apparently he wasn't involved at all. And so now they're not releasing a description that the victim gave them. Why is that? Do they have evidence she's lying, so they don't want to bother to release a sketch of the perp? And also the witness in the park. apparently he and the victim gave the same description of somebody in the park. Remember, the witness did not witness her getting acid thrown on her. All he witnessed was an agitated or aggravated man walking and talking on his cell phone. So, and that's who he gave a description of. And then the victim gave a description of the same person, apparently. Apparently, their descriptions were the same. So, could it be that, yes, the witness gave a true description of who he saw, what he saw, but he did not witness the acid incident at all. But he heard the woman screaming. And so the victim just gave a description of the same person because she needed to give a description. When the police asked her a question, she had to describe somebody, and that's who she saw at the park. Could the woman, be setting somebody up? Could she just not care and just give a description of a black male, or saying, "Oh yes, the same guy who the witness in the park saw talking on his phone. It was him." I don't know how all this happened on the day that this happened. How, what order? Like, did she give a description first, and then the witness in the park, or so forth? But it just seems something fishy about this case. But I could be totally wrong, and there could be somebody out there who threw acid on this woman, and then he either left the area because no other acid attacks have happened, or he was just mad that day, just randomly just threw acid on this woman, and he hasn't done any more acid attacks since then. He could be a mentally ill homeless person, but if it's the same person who threw acid on her as who was talking on the cell phone earlier by the witness who saw a man walking in the park on a cell phone, and we at least know he has a cell phone. And cell phones can be traced. So since nobody has been arrested in all this time, it makes me think the police, FBI, whoever does the cell phone tracing, have not been able to find evidence that the person in the park had anything to do with throwing acid on this woman. So anyway, that's my take right now on this case about the woman in Savannah, Georgia, who had acid thrown on her body. I hope she's doing well physically and mentally, and is healing and can be back to 100% as much as she can. I don't know what all injuries she had. I just know if you've seen the pictures, it looks bad. So she will have lifelong scars from this. So some people may think, gosh, you're evil for even suggesting that she could do this to herself. Well, I'm just speculating because of what the mayor said and stuff. Like, he would know more than I would because he's, the mayor, and he knows what the police are doing. He's talking to the police. He knows what's going on in this investigation more than I would. So if he's saying stuff like, we've never had acid attacks here in Savannah, or in all his time as a police officer, he never saw it there, and it seems like more of a personal thing. Well, he would know. So it just makes me think he knows more than what he's saying, and that something is off about this case. It could be something else is going on here, and he knows it, but he can't say it because it's under investigation. I don't know. I'm just purely speculating. But anyway, on to the next case. The next case I want to talk about is the Nancy Guthrie case, which has not been solved yet, obviously. Recently, Brian Enton from News Nation, and he also has his own YouTube channel called Brian Enton, if you want to subscribe to it. And then on News Nation, he does reporting for News Nation. And he recently did a sit-down interview with three top criminal profilers. Is Ann Burgess, she's on the left here, and I believe Casey Jordan on the right, and then Dr. I forget his name, Bruhal, it starts with a B. I'll have the information below my video, but Brian Enton recently did a sit-down interview with these three top criminal profilers, and I mean, he would ask them, what's their best, well, I'm paraphrasing, but, what's their best guess as to what happened here. So they, went through this whole interview. And what I gathered from this interview is that they don't know. In other words, they gave a lot of different scenarios, which they think could be the case here, but they don't know any more than the general public does because they don't have access to the police files. And apparently, this case is so weird and so unnormal compared to other cases that they can't even come up with a definitive, like a 80, 90, 100% sure educated guess, even with all their experience of what they think happened in this case. So they threw out the idea of a robbery gone bad, and they had to take her body away for, because it had DNA evidence. Um, they they did talk about, like what my original theory on this case was that the family was involved because I had read or saw so much online about, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I've read and heard the rumors about possibly the son-in-law, Nancy's son-in-law had gambling debts, was involved in gambling, and possibly that her daughter, who was married to that same son-in-law, the daughter who lived in Arizona, that she had asked recently for a loan, and Nancy told her no, and that apparently they had a house that they couldn't afford, or they were behind in their mortgage, or something like that. So that would be a motive, financial motive, and revenge. If they asked for a loan and were told no, that would cause anger or could cause anger. Um, and that, there's the rumor or gossip or speculation or truth. It could be a fact that they lived before they bought the home that they live in now, that they lived at Nancy's home with her. So it just seems like who would have more motive to want to get rid of Nancy Guthrie other than people who were close to her, who knew her routine, knew her home, and had motive, possibly, financial motive, a financial gain that they would have received if she disappeared or was deceased. So I still think that that is possible in this case, even though the sheriff has said they have been cleared. And I know people, because it involves Savannah Guthrie, I guess they don't want to think that her own family could be involved. But just statistically speaking, it just seems like a case like this that is more than likely to be a family involvement of somehow. It may not be, her daughter and son-in-law. It could be other family members. It could be distant relatives. I don't know if nieces, nephews, cousins. It could, just somebody else close to her. It could be a caretaker who's not related to her. It could be somebody in her community, somebody in her neighborhood, or the son of somebody in her neighborhood. Um, you know, that there is the theory that it's just a random burglar criminal who just happened to pick that house and her because they knew she lived alone. But I think it's going to be somebody more intimate in her life, somebody more involved in her life, or somebody who knew somebody who is more, who knew her better than just a stranger, or like, the mailman, a delivery person or something. I don't think it's, a mailman, delivery person, Uber driver. I don't think it's is one of those scenarios. I think it's more likely if it's not a family member, then it's going to be somebody like who, cared for her, like a caretaker who knew her for a while. Although I have recently read or heard, I can't remember, in a video on YouTube or whatever, that apparently she didn't have any caretakers currently, that, it was just her daughter and son-in-law and, friends and stuff like that. So she didn't have like paid caretakers, that she didn't need somebody to come in and help her, I don't know, like bathe or do daily activities or clean her house or something. I imagine she had maids. I mean, she had pool cleaners and stuff. But I'm thinking it's not going to be like the lawn care workers, the pool cleaners. It would be somebody more involved within the home. and that we know, like a maid. Could a maid have a family member who decided to rob Nancy, burglarize her home, and something went bad? Or just, you know, could somebody who worked for Nancy have a pervert in their family who decided, oh, she'd be a perfect victim? I mean, I don't like to think that, and it's very rare, but it does happen where perverts will pick elderly women for their victims because they're easy victims, they're alone. Could it just be the one guy who we saw on camera at her door, or are there others involved? I will say in this interview with Ann Burgess and Casey Jordan and the doctor that they did with Brian Enton, I think they all agreed or that they agreed it's more likely that there's more than one person involved. Although they did say, I think especially Casey Jordan did say that it could just be one random person who got lucky on his first crime to not get caught. But, who knows if this case will ever be solved? I like to think that behind the scenes that, they're investigating this and they have a lot more than what they're giving to the public. But it could well be that they don't have a lot more because there aren't any leaks, which I guess is a good thing. But also there's this war between the sheriff of Pima County and the FBI, apparently. Apparently the sheriff doesn't like the FBI, doesn't want them involved. And this video that Brian Enton did on his channel, it says, shocking phone call. Nancy Guthrie sheriff scolds official for talking to FBI. Apparently the sheriff got mad at somebody, one of the officials there in Arizona who spoke and gave information to the FBI. He didn't want her to speak to the FBI. He did not want any information given to the FBI. So is it that the sheriff is just so narcissistic that he wants to be the one who gets the glory when this case is solved, that he doesn't want the FBI involved at all to get any credit for working on this case? Or is it even worse than that? He screwed up this case so bad, and he knows it, that he doesn't want anybody talking to the FBI because he knows he doesn't want the FBI or anybody, the media, to see how badly he has screwed up this case. Or could it just be the usual, war between the FBI and, police? A lot of people are, speaking badly of the sheriff. So I don't live in Arizona. I don't have a personal opinion on that. Just other from the reports, it just sounds bad. Apparently, if the reports are true, and this is from mainstream media, that the sheriff worked in Texas and was fired or resigned before he could be fired for, not doing his job correctly there in Texas. And then somehow he ends up in Arizona and gets hired. And so it's just a big mess. I mean, it sounds like the sheriff isn't very good or professional, but we'll see. Hopefully the sheriff's lack of integrity, if there is some, will not interfere with this case being solved. But I do wish, even though I'm not a big fan of the FBI, of course I know they have skills and resources in cases like this that they could be very useful. So I wish that they could all just get along and just do it for the good, not only for Nancy and her family, but just for the good of the whole country. We can't have egos getting in the way of solving crimes and preventing crimes and helping crime victims and stuff. It's just a shame that it has to be this way. The last case I want to talk about in this video is the case of Christopher Thompkins. And this is his picture on the screen here. He is a young man, a 20-year-old man who went missing back in 2002. So this is the Charlie Project page about his disappearance. So I'll read over it for those who don't remember this case or don't know about this case. But his name was Christopher Carlton Thompkins, and he went missing in Georgia in 2002. So it says he's been missing since January 25th, 2002 from Harris County, Georgia, Classification is endangered missing. And of course, he's a male, black, date of birth December 28th, 1981. So if he was still out there today, he'd be 44 years old. At the time he went missing, he was 20 years old. And it says his height is from 5'7" to 5'9" and 130 pounds. His description at the time he went missing was a black shirt, a blue and gray plaid jacket with a gray hood, navy blue Dickies work pants, tan FUBU work boots, a black skull cap, and a black watch. And like I said, he's a black male, black hair, brown eyes. Thompkins' hair was braided at the time of his January 2002 disappearance. He may have a mustache, beard, or a goatee. He has a tattoo on his right arm of an ice cream cone with his nickname Chris written in, was that vertical letters inside the design. The ice cream part of the tattoo is the head of a joker wearing a hat. So that's a very distinctive tattoo. And so what they have for what happened on the day he disappeared is that Thompkins was working as part of a survey crew in a wooded area near County Line Road off of Warm Springs Road in Harris County, Georgia, on January 25th, 2002. He was accompanied by 3 co-workers, all of whom were approximately 50 feet apart. He was last seen at 1:30 p.m. One of the other crew members looked away from him for a moment. By the time he glanced in that direction again, Thompkins had disappeared. He left his work tools behind and has never been heard from again. Volunteers searched the area shortly after Thompkins' disappearance. One of his boots was located. A piece of blue fiber, apparently from his pants, was found stuck on a nearby barbed wire fence. Thompkins' other boot was found elsewhere in July, 5 months after his disappearance. There was no other evidence indicating his whereabouts. Thompkins' boss stated he'd been acting strangely in the days prior to his disappearance, but his mother, whom he lived with, said his behavior was normal. His case remains unsolved. He resided in Ellerslie, Georgia in early 2002. And so this is his picture again. So there aren't any updates in this case. This young man has never been found, and nobody's ever been arrested regarding his disappearance. Not that anybody should be arrested necessarily, but some people think there was foul play involved, and some people think he just took off, like the coworker said, that he just randomly, one day while they were out working, he, I don't know, went crazy or just, had a anxiety moment, a moment of anxiety where he just took off. He just took off running, according to one of his coworkers that did an interview recently with a YouTuber. Um, so there are a lot of videos and stuff online about this case, but for the best, most recent video about this case, if you want to get updated on this case and actually hear what one of the people who was there when he went missing has to say, you need to watch the Missing Enigmas video, one of the most mysterious disappearances out there, Chris Thompkins. So the Missing Enigma channel made a video about this case, and he actually talked with one of the men who was there at the time Chris supposedly ran off. And so apparently, even after all these years, the family never got to talk to one of the men that he was working with in regards to what happened that day. They apparently got it secondhand from the police and others. They never actually got to talk face to face with one of the people he was working with about exactly what happened that day, to my understanding. So then finally, this channel, the Missing Enigma, brought one of the men who was there that day that Chris went missing and his family, his mother and another family member, together on a phone call, like a 3-way phone call, to talk about this case. And so if you want to know what's happened in this case, the actual facts that are out there regarding this case, this is the video you want to watch. It's some videos, they like say all kinds of crazy stuff like aliens or he was ate by an alligator and all that. But none of them actually go into, why did he disappear that day? Like, actually what happened. Because it's either, unless you believe that maybe aliens took him or something like that, it's either going to be foul play, meaning something happened between him and one or more of his coworkers, or he ran off for whatever reason, mental health issues, anxiety issues, drug issues, or something like that. This case, as the missing enigma talks about in his video, reminds me of that case, I believe it's Idaho, where the young man working on a reality TV show just apparently, according to witnesses there, all of a sudden took off running and ran into the woods and he was never found again. So this case reminds me of that case. But in this case, regarding the coworker who the missing enigma interviews for his video, the young man does have a criminal record and he was in prison. That doesn't mean he did anything to Chris. And just so people will know, there were 4 men working that day that Chris went missing. Chris, who's missing, the young man who is who about the same age as Chris, who was interviewed for this video by the missing enigma, and he is a black male, and the other 2 were white males. And I say that only because people bring race into this case, thinking that his white coworkers didn't care about him or they did something to him and that he's a victim of some kind of racial thing that happened on the job. However, the young man who was a witness that day, who is also black, says, he did not see anything go down between Chris and the coworkers, either himself or the white coworkers. And, he says that Chris just took off, He was there 1 second and the next second he was gone. He just took off. And he did find like pieces of his clothing attached to the barbed wire fence, and they found 1 boot. And the coworker, who was also a friend at the time, he had just met him on the job, but they had become friends. He said that he always wore his boots untied and loose. So he never tied his work boots, they were loose. So that could explain why one of his work boots was found. If he took off running, maybe one of them came off while he was running and he was going over the barbed wire fence. And so that's why one of them was left behind. And months later, like 5 months later, his other boot was found somewhere near a road. I don't know how far from the location where he went missing that boot was found, but this other boot was found. But his coworker confirmed that he liked to wear his boots untied and like loose, so they weren't securely on his feet. So if he was having some kind of a mental health episode or something and just took off running, then they could have fallen off. Or if there was some kind of foul play involved and he was running for his life, his boots could have fell off while he was running for his life. Like I said, this case has never been solved. Chris has never been found, dead or alive. And no more evidence regarding his whereabouts has ever been found. No other pieces of clothing and stuff like that. I would think, like if I lived in that area of Georgia, because I live in Georgia, well, it's been so many years now, but back around the time, I would have looked for signs of him, like pieces of clothing or, signs of footprints or, even a body or whatever, just because it seems like the area he went missing, although it is a rural area and, forested with woods and stuff, like you would think, but there are houses around there in, communities or neighborhoods. So, I mean, you would just think that something would have popped up, or a hiker, walker, a dog would have found something of his if he had just gotten lost out there in the woods and succumbed to the elements or something. And also, you wonder how good of a search did they do back then? Did they search all the bodies of water around the area? Could he have, ran off and then ran through what he thought was a shallow creek or stream, and it turned out to be deeper than he thought, and he drowned? He just been so crazy out of his mind, he jumped in water and drowned. So you wonder how good of a search they actually did back then. But I don't know how far his second boot was found away from his first boot, or where he went missing from the work site. So I don't know how far he was able to travel if he was indeed, if his coworker is telling the truth and he ran off. And a couple of other things. People don't understand why the other two coworkers who were there that day lawyered up real fast. They say they lawyered up real fast. And I don't have an answer for that unless the police were asking them questions and they just come from families with lawyers or families that don't trust the cops. So they, it's their constitutional right, of course, to get a lawyer. I don't know what all the police were asking them if they just got scared. Or it could be maybe even though they had nothing to do with his running off, one of them was his boss, I believe, who was there. So he technically maybe felt responsible or felt like he could be civilly responsible or worried about being sued or something. But the coworker, the young black male who is working with Chris, he does have a criminal history, but unless he did something to Chris or was involved in what happened to Chris, like some nefarious thing, would he lie to protect the other two coworkers? So that's what I find odd. Apparently this man is, out of prison now, and he's not, he's turned his life around, and he's not doing any criminal activity right now. But he is now a convicted armed robber. I don't know what his criminal history was when he got hired on at the survey company, but he did, after Chris went missing, he was in prison and he was convicted of felonies like armed robbery, from what I understand. So, but he was willing to give an interview all these years later, and he says that Chris just ran off. But of course, he could be not telling the truth. He could be saying some of the truth and not all the truth, or he could be totally saying the truth. And this man has taken 3 different lie detector tests with, I believe, 3 different police agencies. I think the local police, or no, the Columbus, Georgia police, the Harris County police, and the FBI, I think, something like that. So he's taken 3 different lie detector tests, and he's been interviewed while he was in prison. He's not in prison now, but while he was in prison for the crimes that he got convicted of, he did get interviewed by the police. And he was never arrested or considered a suspect in this case. And he passed 3 lie detector tests. So, and to my understanding, the other 2 co-workers did not agree to a lie detector test. But again, that's their constitutional right, and they weren't in prison like this other coworker. So maybe, it was just more beneficial for him to be cooperative, and the other 2 who weren't in prison, they had no desire or need to take a lie detector test, and the lawyers told them not to, because defense lawyers always say, do not take a lie detector test. And so that the suspicious thing isn't that Chris went missing on his job. It's, a weird occurrence when that happens. But that's not the suspicious thing. The suspicious thing is that, the coworkers, 2 of them did get lawyered up quickly, and they have refused lie detector tests, and they haven't given any interviews regarding this case today, to this day. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they had anything at all to do with the disappearance of Christopher Thompkins. But if you want to know what all the coworker who did agree to talk to the missing Enigma has to say, watch this video. I'll link it down below this video. This is a great YouTube channel. I recommend it to anybody who's into true crime or into missing persons cases or into people missing from national parks and that type thing, missing 411. It's a great channel. He researches thoroughly. He goes above and beyond. He gets police reports, documents that he can get. I don't believe he was able to get any in this case because it's still an open case, but he actually contacted the family. He contacted the people, or tried to contact and find. He did contact one of the other coworkers, but he said as soon as the wife answered the phone, and as soon as he mentioned Chris's name, she hung up on him. So I guess they probably get a lot of phone calls from YouTubers and content creators. So, but somehow he found the coworker, and I believe his name is Luke, but don't quote me on that. One of the coworkers was named Luke, I believe. But so he found this coworker, and the coworker agreed to talk to him. So, you know, so is the coworker to be believed? I'm not sure. I don't really have a strong opinion on this case. I don't know the I mean, it's possible, like, I mean, I believe, like the coworker says, Chris just ran off. That's very possible. And he has passed 3 lie detector tests. And he's a convicted felon. If the police had evidence on him in this case, they would have arrested him for that case too. Um, but could it have been something like, I know his family says that Chris did not do drugs. Well, families don't always know everything. And when 4 men, I believe 4 young men, I don't know the ages of the other 2, but I think Chris and his coworker who was interviewed for the missing Enigmas video were both around 20. So, maybe they were drinking on the job, doing drugs on the job, smoking weed. And sometimes drugs can affect one person differently than others. Were they smoking some weed that was laced with something and it had a different kind of effect on Chris and it did them? Could Chris, had could have had some kind of different brain chemistry or something going on where a drug would affect him differently? So that's the only scenario I can think of, is that either they were all four, did some kind of drug and it affected Chris differently, so he started acting weird and he ran off, and they just didn't tell the police that part even after all these years. But the young man who was working with Chris passed 3 lie detector tests, so wouldn't the police, the questions have included things like, do you know any reason why he would have suddenly taken off, or something like that? Um, so if it wasn't drugs, and maybe Chris did his own drugs, they weren't like doing drugs together. Maybe Chris did do his own drugs. Maybe he got some bad weed, because I believe his mother did say he smoked weed, but he didn't do other drugs. Could he have had some weed that was laced with something that changed his brain chemistry and he got paranoid? Or was he doing other drugs that his mom just doesn't want to admit to or believe? And the only other thing I could think of involving foul play of some type was that they got in an argument or a fight, the workers did, and something bad happened, and they all just lied. Well, 2 lawyered up and didn't say anything, and the other one, for whatever reason, has been able to pass 3 lie detector tests. Some people can pass lie detector tests even though they committed a crime, so I don't know. But otherwise, if there was no foul play involved, then it's just Chris had some kind of mental health episode and he just took off running and got lost in the woods there. Now, I think the sheriff thinks he apparently made it somewhere and took a bus or hitched a ride somewhere to another city and is still out there somewhere, or he maybe died as a John Doe and just hasn't been discovered yet. It's possible that he has passed away and he was in a morgue somewhere and they just haven't connected it to him yet. So maybe Chris is a John Doe out there somewhere, but I don't know. But if you're interested in the Chris Thompkins case, you really need to watch the Missing Enigmas video. Oh, hang on. You okay? My dog hurt herself. So that's it for this video. I highly recommend the Missing Enigmas channel. He does great work. All his videos are excellent, top notch. So he's one of my favorites to watch.